Okay guys, so in this video I am actually just gonna sit here with you and watch myself basically implement a very basic design of, I think it's Trello, with CSS utility driven development. So as you can pretty much see here, I'm just setting up the project, and basically that's the site we're gonna make. We're gonna make a Trello board, or a very basic implementation of it. So I'm just setting up the project, initializing everything with npm because I'm gonna use post CSS for this, and that's pretty much it really. Usually what I do when I work with CSS is I have a main CSS file, as you can see right there, and a global CSS file, where basically the main file acts as the entry point, and the global file is just where I can store global styles. And in case you didn't know that, I'm not infallible and I don't know everything by heart, so I had to kind of go there and have a look at the documentation for post CSS, because I pretty much always forget what the configuration is supposed to be. But I always do remember to set it up correctly with the exact flag, as you can see there, and that's a very important thing because we don't want ranged versions, because ranged versions are the devil themselves. It's the devil. It is definitely the devil. And so hopefully this will all pan out, and there we are. I finally managed to actually set it up so that my post CSS script runs with npm start, and then it's going to point to the main.css file where I actually do all my imports. And right now I'm just setting up the the base structure for my CSS, and I usually reset the margins and the box sizing to border box, just to reset all of the things so that they are consistent with most of the browser. And then we're going to save this progress, because this is pretty much us done with the setup now. And next up should be that we're actually going to start working on the header, which is the top section there, as you may have seen. So let's see here. I think if I remember right, yeah, I remember now. So I had a look at basically, well, I tried at least to figure out if I could just use the same icons as the rest of the the styling on Trello, but they're using glyph icons, and they're bundling all of their stuff together, so which made it a little bit harder for me to figure out, okay, how am I supposed to get that in there. So I think I'm just skipping that in this video and actually just using text for all of the buttons instead. But now you can start seeing at the very least that my pattern of using utility driven or utility CSS driven design or development is starting to shape. So basically this pattern is very simple. All I'm doing is that I group my different properties into different CSS files. So I will have one for things such as colors, and colors usually contain a naming structure such as bg-color-color name, or color-color name, depending on which property I'm using. It's just colors, right? And heights and margins and paddings and so forth are also named in the same way. So that's just the basic naming construction that I use. And I also, you may notice there that there's an icons.css file going on as well, and that's another part as well. So there are different layers of utility classes that I use. So I have 3 layers. I have the base layer, where I basically just keep these absolute bare bone basic pretty much one CSS property classes, such as margins and paddings and stuff like that. Then there's another layer to it, which is in this case icons, where we have it on a component layer, where I just know that it's not so easy to express that, oh, this icon here. I mean, it's basically it's just more efficient for me to create an icon utility class that just resets all the stylings of a button or some element to what I need it to be, and then create another class on top of that to give me the permutation of the icon. As you can see, I'm kind of working with icon, and then I have the blue color, or blue 2, on top of that, in order to actually style those icons. And I had the last layer is basically that I have like at an entire component level, which we will see later on in this video, where I like declare a column, which is a group of an entity in of itself, like an entire structure of things where it has children and stuff like that, and it's so unique that it doesn't really make sense to create these reusable utility classes to handle that sort of thing. And so now I'm setting up the flex properties, and basically, as you can see there, flex align center. Hopefully that feels fairly straightforward. Flex justify space between, and that just sets the justify content space between, and I can put that on the header. I think I've changed my mind there because I thought the name was a little bit off. So let's update that name and make it something a little bit more digestible. And this is, well, it's more or less the entire work pattern I have. So I try to, sometimes I will like compose classes together, but for the most part this is the way I do it. So here I am off on a tangent and I'm completely lost because my silly little brain decided that, hey, you know what, let's try to create the spacing by creating a min width, or like a width, setting a width on the container around those buttons there, or icon buttons, instead of doing the obvious thing, which would be to just, you know, hey, let them take the space that they actually want and then put a margin or a padding right instead. But, you know, I'm not fallible. Or I'm not perfect, that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not perfect, but if you try to expose that to somebody else, I will deny it, because, hey, you know, my market value is based on me being perfect. So now I finally got wise and I realized that, oh, yep, let's use the margin right instead, because that is a much more efficient way of solving that problem, instead of trying to set some static width and then just let's flexbox kind of align, allocate the remaining space. So that's pretty much more or less the rough edges of the header, and now I'm just adjusting a few things here because we still need that little FC circle or oval up there on the top as well. And then yeah, if you're wondering about my naming convention around different colors and stuff like that, so there is this convention that some people use that I just don't like, and that is that they give names to their colors like primary, secondary, warning, and all of that stuff. And in my experience, it's just a matter of time before someone comes around and says, hey, you know what, primary isn't primary anymore. We need a primary that isn't the primary, it's something else instead. So I've just found it to be much easier to just say, just give it an arbitrary name. I usually like versioning things like blue 1, 2, 3, 4, because like it scales infinitively. You can have as many ideally you shouldn't. Ideally you should stick to just having a few set colors, but it just never turns out that way. It always ends with someone doing something else, right? So this is just something I do. You don't have to do that. Now you notice that I have an icon and I have a circle icon because I've thought to myself that, yeah, you know, the circle icon is different enough to warrant its own class, or its own utility class. And very soon you will see, or rather maybe I've already done that part. No, it's gonna come up very soon. So now I'm just trying to figure out if the coloring, yeah, because I got the colors wrong as well. I think I used that little color picker up there in this right corner, you may have noticed when I'm referencing it, and it doesn't always give me the right color. But I realized something, that if I'm gonna do the hover color, I will need a connection between the icon and the selector. Like, I need to create a connection here. And my first thought was that, okay, if I'm gonna connect these different blue color values to both the class, the blue class, the BG color blue 2, and the icon blue selector, or like these two classes, I need to connect. You know, I just basically need a connection. And as you can see here, first I thought, alright, let's do an extension type of thing, but then I remember that, hey, we have CSS variables, so instead of doing that, I can just declare a variable that references the same color value, put that in the global style, and then I achieve the same goal. Now I know that my icon-blue2 and my BG color or my color-blue2 are referencing the same value, so I don't get a misalignment between the two. And I absolutely love CSS variables, especially for font sizes and colors and stuff like that. Usually, as you can see here now, I'm kind of just hard coding some stuff because I haven't had a situation where I'm using the exact same value in two places, so I'm just keeping them separate until I find that, oh yeah, these are actually referenced in two places, one in one of my base utilities such as like the colors and the margins and stuff like that, and one in somewhere else. So unless there's literally a connection, I won't actually change it all that much. And now I created another one, icon blue 3, which is just of course going to reference the notice button, because that tint or like that shade of blue is a bit different or whatever. There are people who are much more versed in the language of colors who can tell me what color that actually is. To me it's all blue. And I think that should be, yeah, that's pretty much it. So now we have more or less the header done. So now it's time to set up the subheader, if I remember correctly. Yes, so I had some mistakes in my HTML here, so I need to do a little bit of restructuring. So now we're gonna put in that brink, like the title of my board, which is in this case brink, which is a project that I am working on. It's just a personal project that I'm working on. And if it ever gets to be finished, hopefully it's going to take over the world and make me into a billionaire. And I will of course make a video about how I made all those billions. Available to you for only $29.99. So let's see if I can get this together. Cause yeah, there we are. Nice. Blue colors, and then I realized that shit, I have the wrong tint of blue color on the header and the body. Why? And it comes back to that damn little pipette thing I have that up there in the right corner, where I love that tool. So I think it's called Color Picker or something like that. It's absolutely amazing for just getting a color really quickly, but sometimes it doesn't really work when I'm using I'm using the inspector, and it's kind of weird when I'm doing that, so sometimes I actually get the wrong color value. So hopefully with a little bit of trial and error here I will actually manage to get the correct color. But what's really nice about this is that because we're using utility classes, since I'm trying, it's very easy for me to just figure out all the places where I'm actually referencing this color, because all I have to do is to search for the color name or the class name and do a search and replace. And then it's all done. Like I change the color value and now all of those colors are supposed to be something different. Do a search and replace, everything is just fixed. I don't have to worry about anything. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So now we're adding a little bit of padding here. You see that my naming convention there is usually that, okay, the thoughts I have around like things such as padding and margins is that I will start with an arbitrary middle point. Usually 8 pixels is a good sweet spot for me, so I say padding MD for medium basically, and then I go -L or -S depending on if I want to go bigger or smaller. I think I did SM there, but that's not going to stick around for very, very long. I'm going to change that to, well, maybe I did actually keep it as SM. It doesn't matter. Basically, the middle point is always going to be something, and then I go large or I go small, and if I actually need more versions, I can just add an X on top of there. In some really weird cases, I've had like, I don't know, margin dash extra small. Like it depends on how different. Ideally, it's usually just a few X's that I add on top so that I can express smaller or larger margins. But you know, you have to be pragmatic about these things. And so here I create a few more utility classes, so I can do padding left, padding right, and so forth. In a moment here, I think I'll also add, yep, here it is, height. I have, apart from having all of the standard like content box directions like top, right, left, bottom, etc., etc., I have something that I call height and width, which is just, you may have guessed me saying that, okay, if I have a padding height 20 pixels, then it's going to be 20 pixels top and bottom. If I have a padding of 20 or if I have a padding width, it's going to be 20 pixels on the side, on the left and right. That's just a way for me to conveniently, so I don't have to have 4 utility classes to express that I want all these different directions to have different values. And it's just a convenience thing for me to save some time. You don't have to do that. And then we're adding some fonts here because I realized that my font family was incorrect. I think it's just the default, so I stole the fonts directly from the people at Trello, and then I realized that, hey, you know what, I don't actually need a fonts file for that. It's actually the same font all across the board, so I might as well just put that in my global styles because reasons. I'm probably going to add the fonts file back again. I think I've added and removed that file 3 or 4 times in this little video of mine. Anywho, let's see here. Where are we? Are we getting done? Yes. Okay, I realize here somewhere that, yeah, that text there is gonna have to go and get a little bit smaller, because I think the font size is wrong there. Definitely it's gonna have to be 18 pixels or something like that, if I remember. Yeah, so there we go again. Font size large, 18 pixels, and I call that large out of the box because I usually have the middle or the medium to be 16 pixels, because once upon a time I read somewhere that 16 pixels is roughly the size that makes text that should be the minimum size for most people who have a sight disability. I'm grabbing that. That's completely, you know, don't quote me on that, it could be completely wrong. And so now we're gonna add in the dividers for my headers section. I'm not super happy with that I called this specific thing headers, because headers could have been like headline tags and stuff like that. And I'm even less pleased that I call those little white stripes that are between the buttons div. It could have, the naming here is absolutely awful, so don't follow the naming convention here. So what I'm trying to express here is basically the thing I was saying earlier, that okay, this is the top layer of a name that I give a group of CSS selectors, where I have like a, it's just very I don't want my base utility classes to get mixed into things that are such a natural group, like the headers or like the navigation at the top there. It's so much easier to just say that, all right, these are some selectors that are truly unique to this section of the code. So I'm just going to call that headers, or I could call it navigation headers or something like that. And then I will simply say that div, I mean, because that little stripe there, I'm not going to use that anywhere else ever, most likely, when I do this layout. So, and if that changes, of course, I'm going to pull it down to the base layer so that I actually have a more generic utility class that can actually express that thing. But sometimes it's just more pragmatic to just have a very specific selector, like in this scenario. So let's see if I can make that white, or actually get the grouping right, because here's this where I realized that, hey, I'm missing the star button. I think so, at least. Or is it? No, I make it white first. Yes. Good boy. Finally, yes. And there I am unsure about my spelling. Hopefully it's right. For the English native speakers out there, you can tell me if I spelled it right or not. Let's see here. So now we're gonna start working on the next part, which is going to be, let's see here. Yeah, we're gonna work on the content area now, if I remember correctly, right? So I realized that I have some mistakes in my HTML, which is great. There we are, finally, content area achieved. So now we're going to move that into a div because I need the background color to actually span more than that little section there. So let's do that. Yes, now I have some content area. So declare a main area where we're going to put all those nice columns. So let's put some divs in here and just get some basic HTML structure going there. I usually just add some structure. This is how I usually do it when I'm designing something based off something else. I'm simply going to create the basic HTML structure first, so I kind of map out in my head that okay, these elements, they're going to go in a header group of some sort, and then there's going to be, as you see here, an unordered list inside of a div, and it's in a div because I need to overflow, and since I need to overflow, because I need to be able to scroll and all that good stuff, right? So there I create another one of those higher level group files, which is columns, because I mean there's no CSS property that is called columns, unless we're counting grid, but then I would call that file grid. So columns is just because these elements are so unique that there are some elements to it that it just doesn't make sense that I'm going to express every single thing about this specific entity through generic selectors. So I simply create a column class that does some base styling to make it into the specific element into the correct width, the correct like the correct color and stuff like that. It's just more pragmatic. I could, honest to God, I could have just created base selectors or base utility classes that I could compose together to just express the same thing, but it's simply not. It's simply just going to be a bunch of selectors that are going to be used just in this one scenario. And I argue that it's just simpler for me to do it this way in certain cases. And then if I realize that, yeah, I actually need these selectors, I'll move them up one level. Here you can see, for example, that I didn't do it for the list. I actually created a specific selector file for a utility class file for the list so that I could actually express list none. And the same thing goes for border radius. I create a borders CSS file, and then that's pretty much it, really. Instead of like that, I could have also put that in the columns, but I realized that, you know, adding 5 pixels of border radius, that's probably something I'm going to use more than once. So instead of making that part of that kind of ugly, because ideally you don't want to have too many of these columns and headers and like these higher level groups, you want to use the base selectors as much as possible, but sometimes it's just, you know, it's just more pragmatic. So we change the BG colors to white. Trying to create all of those nice little card elements there. Inconsistent. I knew I used S and then I use SM everywhere else, so try to forget that I'm inconsistent and absolutely horrible at everything. There we are, we have some elements and now we need some spacing between them, so we're gonna add some margins, and margins are so nice. Bottom, margin bottom. Add another card. Yes, and this is about the time I realized that my naming for the icons is kind of off, because basically all my buttons, even the ones that aren't icons, are also using the icon selector or that utility class. So I should probably refactor that and make it a nicer name, because it's super confusing that some of the buttons are actually without an icon, like the ones that would have had an icon, they're using the same one as the ones that actually has text. But it doesn't really matter right now. I could refactor that in a heartbeat, and this is one of those really nice, useful things about having utility-driven CSS development, because if you want to refactor something, that it's so easy. Like, you just have to select the grab the CSS, like the name of the class, and then you can just rename it to whatever, and there you go. It's very easy to track down all the places where you actually need to update something. And if you've done everything correctly, it shouldn't break all that much. Well, it shouldn't break anything. And here I create a buttons file, which is once again like it's just it's a component level instead of just being a base level. And the button selector, all it really does is that it resets all of the button styling, because I'm against destructive CSS. I would never ever do that. Never style the button tags. Like, you just don't do that. Like, if someone uses a button element, there should be no CSS that mutates that button to not be that boring gray weird color that the people working on the browser standards decided that it should be. Let them have that if they really want it, and then just create a class instead that changes that behavior. And here you see that I have a button that is kinda like, this is one of those cases where I actually add it into the columns section, because I feel that it makes sense. Like, I don't want to create a generic button that looks that exact way, because no button, it's very unlikely that any of the other buttons are going to have that weird, like, it's just giving it a slight tint and then using the same background. So I decided to put that in the columns group and just create a utility class that is working within the columns namespace or so forth. And I also even did some Boy Scouting. I realized that it's nice to actually put some comments for the different sections of where I'm putting these different margins, like if it's going to be the height ones, or it's going to be right, left, top, bottom, etc, etc. And here I'm a little bit confused, because I realized that I made a mistake with my height and my width selectors. Because usually I don't have both. Sometimes I have both, but I forgot that I actually need to break these from just being the padding property to actually specifically saying padding left, right, top, bottom, and so forth. Because otherwise they are going to collide with each other. So if I have both height and the width selector, or the utility classes, on at the same time, it's just the last one I use is going to be the thing that or rather the cascading effect is going to take place, and it's actually going to just apply one of those properties or one of those classes. So then I just split them up into all their separate components instead of using the convenience version. And now we're getting to the end of this. It should be, and now I really only need to set the height of the body. So I create a flex columns utility to set the flow to column. So I can set the body to have flex and flex column, because what I want is to set the height, and I want the content section, the main or the body section, to actually grow to the height of the parent, like to be the full width. And then I create a height utility for just the version height. And yeah, that's pretty much it really. So let's see, I set the height, and then I get that onto the body so that the body height is 100% of the view. There we are. And I realized that I put that on the wrong element, and here we are. Ta-da! It's a basic version, I know, but it kind of looks right, I hope. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So this has just been a very quick example of how I work with utility-driven CSS. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.